as you try to forecast the economy for 2017, 2018, okay, let's say maybe the market isn't going to get its ultimate wish list of tax cuts and infrastructure stimulus and all that, but what can it expect? What do you see coming down the pipe here?
I see the beginning of more congressional impasse and the possibility of getting back into political gridlock again. And the power of Trump's Twitter is going to be key here, because if he names and shames, he may be able to stall that kind of gridlock and actually get the legislation through. One of the things that we'd be careful about is that if he names and shames too many of these people, right, they'll just gang up against him, and that'll be a disaster for the ability to get the legislation passed.
Will naming and shaming lose some of its potency if he continues to do it? I mean, it's been very effective in the early days, but will it be as effective in year 2 of his administration?
Great point, Scarlet. And that's why when I was in China the last month, and everyone there says you got to treat Trump as a negotiator. Everything out of his mouth is going to be the beginning of a negotiating position. So you can't take him literally. And even the tweets that he does, right, they're designed to get him a positioning for the bargaining, whether it's with Defense Department contractors or with China over trade policy. But the markets, I think, are starting to realize that it's going to be a much more complicated process than they had priced in before. And you sort of think, what is it that the equity markets are actually seeing? I think they're seeing a lot of dividend stock buybacks, deregulation, especially on a sectoral basis.
Do you see risk to the market specifically from the trade side? Because if there's one thing in Trump's economic agenda that he seems very into, that's very consistent, it is his views that the rules of trade need to be rewritten. How concerned are you about that in the short term and the medium term?
Well, actually, believe it or not, I think he's got some real economics there. Because, for example, when a small country and a big country open up the trade, who is it that gains the most? It's a small country, not the big country, because their terms of trade change the most. So Trump is right to say that the U.S. has been at the raw end of every trade deal because we've been the big country. But when it comes to China, because we're both two large economies, even the Chinese know that the gains from trade will be determined by a bilateral negotiation of sector-by-sector market access and other terms, which I think is something they're prepared for. And they know they hold, quote, the Trump card, because all they have to do is sit there, smile for 2 years. We have congressional elections, and if the Republican majority starts to ebb, we know Trump's in trouble.
Bill, whether it's a deal with Mexico or with China, do you believe there are possible deals available that would change the rules but would be acceptable and beneficial to both sides, in theory?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because let's remember, there's no such thing as free trade on this planet. We have distorted trade. We have customs unions all over the place, whether it's the EU or potentially could have been TPP or NAFTA or free trade agreements. It's distorted trade. What Trump is, I think, proposing to do is change the nature of distortion to favor U.S. domestic income and employment gains. And so that in that world, a bilateral set of trade deals, especially if they're done sector by sector, allows these trade deals to be dynamic and to be live. For example, when NAFTA was negotiated, there was almost no intra-industry trade between Mexico and the U.S. Right now, intra-industry trade defines the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico. So I think Mexicans and the Canadians are both very eager to renegotiate a static, dead trade deal that's not reflecting the dynamics of and structure of the U.S. And the three economies.
What can the U.S. offer countries like Mexico and Canada to make that palatable to them?
I think one of the things that would be offered to anyone negotiating with the U.S., especially Mexico and Canada, would be more market access to the U.S. huge consumer market and access to the markets that are in Mexico and Canada. Mexico, for example, has got trade ties to a good chunk of South America, and that is sort of a window for us to use to have our exports go freely into that world. And that's something that the U.S. would benefit from in terms of high-paying jobs and other things that the Trump administration is after.